Hello. Hi, Alex. I'd like to thank you for taking part in the Formations programme at a very busy time in your professional career.
Yeah.
And I'd like to start out just by telling the audience something about you. You're the author of 15 novels, about 15 novels.
Around about 15, yeah.
Around about 15. Recipient of the Children's Fiction Prize, Guardian Children's Fiction Prize, among other awards. And you're also awarded an MBE for services to literature.
Yeah.
And most recently, your life story was shown as part of a series directed by Steve McQueen called Small Axe, and it portrays the lives of the West Indian community in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And what a life you've had. I mean, you've had an extraordinary life. You grew up in a children's home. You were for a while in prison following the Brixton riots. And I think that's where you discovered your love of literature. Would it be fair to say that sort of that's where your love of literature began?
Properly, I guess. But when I was young, when I was about 6, 7, 8, I would pick up guarded comics on a dormitory floor of my children's home. And there I discovered the Beano, Whizzing Chips with Dandy magazine, and Shoot magazine too. And sometimes when it was a child's birthday, they might receive a football annual. And once they finished with that, they would leave that on the floor also. So I would gobble it up as well. And so I think that really supplemented my reading ability from a very young age, because it was a form of escape for me, these comics and books that I used to read under the covers of my bed. And so without even realizing it, my reading levels were quite high when I was very young. But obviously, my term in prison, I went back to my reading, which was a fantastic thing for me. It made me realize that I can progress. And it was like an education in itself, because I was reading books from everywhere.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to that experience, because you had a really important mentor, didn't you, when you were in your prison cell? So I'd like to come back to that when I sort of talk about the film. But I came across your work when I heard you being interviewed on Front Row, and you were talking about your latest YA book, which is this book here.
Yes, Cane Warriors.
And it's about a slave uprising in the 1700s in Jamaica.
Yeah.
On a sugar plantation, and sugar production was one of the themes that we wanted to cover in the Formations programme. So when I heard you speaking, that's when I reached out to you. And I wonder if you could tell us how you came across this story, because I know that it's actually based on real events.
Yes, that's correct. It is based on real events. And really, I've come full circle, because in prison, Simeon passed on to me The Black Jacobins by the great CLRs, and that introduced me to Caribbean history, and especially slave revolts. I mean, the Black Jacobins concentrates on the events of 1791 in Haiti, which was then known as Santo Domingo. And that always stuck in my mind. I never had access to history like that when I was attending school. And so during my writing career, I've always figured that I would go back and address this issue, especially in Jamaica. And usually in popular culture in Jamaica, you hear about Paul Bogle, you hear about Sam Shah and various slave revolts, but Taki is hardly ever mentioned. And so it was with a conversation I had with my mother about 2-3 years ago. And she lives in Washington, D.C. And so when I get the opportunity to speak with her, I like her experiences of growing up in Jamaica. And she grew up in a town called Richmond in St. Mary Parish, which is near the North Coast. And she remembers when she was very young that the elders would sometimes mention Taki's name. And she wasn't quite sure who he was or what he achieved. But I researched it. Google is your friend. And so once I researched Taki and see what he achieved, I thought, oh my gosh, how comes this story is not well known or not in the canon of world history? Because indeed he led this slave revolt on Easter Sunday in 1760. He basically killed all the overseers and masters at a number of plantations. He marched to the north coast where the British had a garrison there. He sacked that, killed everybody there, stole all the guns and ammunition. And then there was this incredible last stand. And I felt, wow, a story just begging to be wrote here. And so that's what got me going. It really got my blood going too, the anger, the injustice of it all, and the slave trade and everything. And I think people need to hear this story. And so really, I'm just representing my ancestors in Cane Warriors and giving them a voice. I want to
repeat a couple of things that you said in case anybody wants to sort of look that book up. So when you were in the prison cell, you were given a book called The Black Jacobeans. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's about an uprising in Haiti.
That's right. Yeah.
That was one of my questions. You've answered it now, which is fine. But there seemed to be a direct link between that book that you read and the story that you wrote many years later.
Absolutely, because I believe they're connected. Because slave revolt was big news back in 1760 and the following years. So I estimate a guess that in Haiti this was heard about, and so the French, who were in control of the island, they probably were even more brutal to make sure that their slaves were obedient. But Toussaint Louverture, he led the revolution there in 1791. And I'm sure Toussaint Louverture and his fellow comrades were inspired by what Taki tried to achieve in Jamaica just a generation earlier. And so for me, they're connected, very much connected.
Now, I read that in the 1700s, there were 430 sugar plantations in Jamaica. So it was a massive industry and hugely exploitative, both of the people and the resources. I mean, you've sort of mentioned this, but how important do you think it is for young people in Britain to be aware of British colonial history? And was one of your aims to make these sort of stories available in mainstream literature?
Well, one of my motivation is for young people who are attending school now to understand what colonial history was all about. And it was mainly about exploitation and making as much money as possible. I mean, they did that in the Indian continent, in India, and with what's it called, the Royal East Company, I think it was. Maybe someone can correct me, but I'm sure it's called the Royal East Company. And basically, what their task was make as much money as possible and exploit as much people as possible. The East India, the East India Company. Yeah. And so it was similar in the Caribbean, where it was a money crop basically. Sugar, it earned fortunes. It really did, and it built institutions as well. It led to the funding of the Industrial Revolution, the banking system, 300 or so years ago. And so it's very significant what occurred in Jamaica and how much money they made from Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean, and that cannot be just swept under the carpet. It's real, and people need to acknowledge that instead of the establishment every now and again and come out with books about Wilberforce and how he helped abolish slavery, and they don't even inform people that the slave masters in 1833 were given the sum of £20 million. In today's money, that is huge. You're talking probably in the billions here. And so obviously they had a motivation to abolish slavery with that kind of compensation. And so the history has been off key and unbalanced, if you like. So what I'm trying to do is give the perspective of those who actually fought and sacrificed themselves to end slavery.
Yeah. Now, you said that you you Googled, you did some Google research on it, and that you spoke to your mother. But didn't you also go to the place or the plain where the battle took place? You went to Jamaica, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And it's a beautiful part of Jamaica. So if any of you get to go to Jamaica, and usually holiday makers, they travel to the North Coast where Ocho Rios, and the big hotels there. I would ask them to travel east a bit along the coast to Port Maria. And once you get to Port Maria, visit Noah Coward's old Firefly property, because that is next door to Fort Haldane, where the British had their garrison. Indeed, Captain Morgan had a property on the same estate even before the uprising, the slave revolt. And so it's a very significant area, and it's a beautiful part of Jamaica that offers a fantastic view of the Caribbean, because it's something like above 1,000 feet sea level. So please go there if you can, if you happen to be in Jamaica, and just try and sense the peril, the danger of these.
When you went there, did you sort of hear the whispers of the battle that took place there? Did you feel, the presence of those souls? Or
yes, I did. The mind begins to play tricks. There's this short waterfall once you go further. It's a lovely waterfall inland, and you just kind of close your eyes and imagine these singing their songs and getting ready for battle. It's quite inspiring.
Yeah. Now, it is a book that's full of violence. The slaves set out to kill the slave masters in a number of plantations, and then they end up in this fort. I didn't find it gratuitous because of the way that you'd written it. I found it difficult. I found lots of things in it difficult about the way the slaves were treated, and the fact that young children had these terrible jobs to do. But the violence, the killings in the battles was quite extreme, and there was a lot of it in the book. And I wonder what goes through your mind when you're writing these scenes. How do you know that when you're writing for young people, where to draw the line? Is there a line in the sand when you're writing for young adults in terms of describing violence?
Well, I have to try and present the story as authentic as possible. And young people actually live through these experiences, and these experiences occur to them. You could go as far back as with Diaries of Anne Frank and what she described in Germany, or where was it? Amsterdam, I think it was. Was it? Yeah, and it was very stark and very troubling. But I think she offered a certain truth there that we cannot look away from. And I think that in my narrative, Cane Warriors, I have to present that truth. This is how it was. It was. You had 11, 12, 13-year-olds working the cane fields, and they were whipped and treated appallingly, just the same as the older men were. So I've got to replicate that in my narrative.
So
I cannot flinch away.
Presenting an authentic account of
That's
that.
right.
I mean, what I've found with some readers, and also with some writers, is that they can deal with extremely violent scenes in fantasy, but when you present it as a reflection of real life, a lot of people struggle. Have you found, when you've read the book to children, or not children, or young adults, what's been their reaction to the violence in the book?
Well, so far it's been extremely positive, and they understand why I had to describe such acts in that manner. They really understand and get it, because they want to understand what was the condition. What was the mind go through a young man's mind as they're going through these experiences, and seeing people killed and being confronted with white overseers who want to chop off their heads. There's no shying away from that, and I think I presented that in an honest way. I didn't try to be too gratuitous.
No, it's not gratuitous.
So I'm just trying to present 99% fact, because obviously I don't know the full details. I wasn't on the battlefield, so I never saw every killing or every slaying. So I'm just trying to present it in an authentic way as much as possible.
Now, I think when you started writing novels, you started writing for adults, but now you write predominantly for young adults.
Yeah.
Why did you make that switch?
I think I was getting a bit frustrated. I was receiving incredible reviews for my fiction, my adult fiction, East Jamaica Lane, Brixton Rock, and Dirty South, and so on. But I felt there was a glass ceiling above me in terms of I wasn't seemed to be marketed that very well by my publishers. I was never invited to the major festivals like Hay, Cheltenham, Edinburgh, and so on. And so I felt I've got to try something different. And I knew from what school librarians had told me that my books were very popular in schools. And so I had to sit down with my agent, and she said, she suggested that maybe I should try something for young adults. And so that's what I did with Little Bit, where it was embraced by young people and school librarians all over the country and further beyond. That it was a great opportunity for me. So I quickly followed that up with Crongton Knights, and mentioned earlier that won a major award, was nominated for a number of awards. And I think that I'm in a very good space here. You know, I think my writing tends to suit for young adults because it's to the point. It's direct. It's you know, what we say in writing is that I trim off the fat off the bone kind of thing. So I keep it lean, mean, and keep it on plot. So and that's what my writing does. So it engages.
That was going to be my other question, because we've got a lot of writers, I think, in the audience who, I mean, so you, is it a process that you had to, did you go on a steep learning curve to go from writing for adults to writing for children or young adults, or did you find it natural, that process?
It took me a while because sometimes you got to shorten your sentences. You got to be more direct. You got to keep the plot moving. So that was, with Little Bit, that happened over a process of around about 2 years before that novel was ready to be sent out. But I think I had an advantage already because my writing tended to be plot driven anyway, and character driven as well. So basically, I didn't stop to smell the roses in my storytelling. I just wanted to tell story. And that's very important, whether you're writing for children or young adults. You have to engage the reader and take them along.
Yeah. But you've got lots of sensory detail in your books for young adults. So maybe you sort of taken something with you from the way that you wrote your adult fiction. But I sort of did notice that some sort of great metaphors, and you always return to sensory detail to evoke sense of place.
That's very important for I think a young adult writer, that you try to give the reader a picture and put them in that scenario, if you like, in that space. That's what I try to do in my fiction, and I try to make that as short and efficient as possible. And so when I'm describing an estate, I might describe a graffiti on the side of a wall, or the smell of something on the ground, or a dog just running by, just to give them a sense of what that space might be like. And you don't have to be flowery with it. You don't have to write 3 or 4 sentences. No. Just keep it efficient. I think that is the key for young adult writing.
Yeah, and it's consistently there, so you keep returning to it. It's not like a big ream of description and then you forget about it for 10 chapters. It's just seamlessly woven in, and it keeps you rooted in that place.
That's right.
So I sort of noticed that about your book, and I thought that was great.
And if I can add, I'm a big fan of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and what he's fantastic at is his description of landscape. And so what I did with my Crongton series and Cane Warriors, I take some of Tolkien, but I strip it right down. Because Tolkien might go on for 2 pages to describe a mountain range or a landscape of Aragorn and Bilbo, or whatever, you know, but I just trim that right down and try to make it short, sharp, and efficient to give the readers a visual kind of sense of where the story is taking place.
Yeah, And am I right in saying that a lot of your other writing is drawn from your own life and from your own experiences?
Yes, it is.
Could you give us an example of one of the books and how it's drawn from your own life experience?
Well, Eve Makis itself. For those who have seen the Alex Wheatle episode, there are scenes in Eve Makis that I actually experienced, like the riot scenes, me getting told by a drug lord to basically take off my clothes. That happened to me once. Me jumping into a large garbage bin, being chased by the police, I experienced that too. So there's a lot of me in Eve Makis and also Brixton Rock. I think many writers do that, especially for their initial novel. They can't help but put themselves in it, sometimes subconsciously. And I guess because my young life was so action-packed, if you like, or so eventful, I can't help but use those experiences in my fiction.
Could I ask you, how did you become the subject of a film created and directed by Steve McQueen? And for those who don't know, he directed 12 Years a Slave, and he's done lots of other things as well. I think he won the Turner Prize, didn't he, or something?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he's an incredible man.
He's an incredible man.
Multi-gifted.
I do know the answer to this question, but I think it's really interesting, and I'd like the audience to find out how you became the subject of a mini-series.
Well, what happened was my agent heard about this Steve McQueen project almost 5 years ago or so. And she read that Steve wanted to address the experiences of the West Indian from, say, the late 60s to the mid-1980s. And my agent said, well, Alex, this is the area that you cover, so maybe we can get you into that, that creative space. And so I think she dropped off a few of my books at Steve's London agents' offices. We kind of hoped that they would get back to us and maybe for an interview so I could be part of the writing team or the creative team. And it proved very lucky because we got a call some weeks later and I came for an interview. I wasn't interviewed by Steve at that point, but the producers. And they were quite impressed with what I had to say, my thoughts on the late 1960s to the early 1980s, and my books, Eve Makis and Brixton Rock. And I think they had a look at that and a read of that. And then I found myself being interviewed by Steve himself. So I was invited into the creative team, into the writer's room. And so we were discussing various themes and what should be included in the series, various narratives. And one morning, Steve came in and he had in mind this story about a young black man or teenager who had lived through institutions, had experience of maybe children's homes or young offenders institutions or prison. And one of my fellow writers, Alistair Siddons, he looked at me and said, Alex, that is you. Why don't we do your story? And so Steve looked at me and said, Alex, you got something to say? And so for the rest of that day, I related my journey. And at the end of it, Steve said, wow, we've got to do that. And the decision was made on the spot that Alex Wheatle would be an episode in the series. So that's how it happened. That was 4 years ago now. And it was screened last Sunday. And I still have to pinch myself. Is it really happening? And indeed it was.
So how did it feel to be on the receiving end in a way? I mean, like you write about other people, although you sort of included your own stories, and there was someone writing about you. How did that feel? Because you didn't write the screenplay, did you?
No, I was asked to. Steve came up to me and said, Alex, this is your story. I'm inviting you to write it. But I felt, especially of the scenes that involved me as a young kid in a children's home, getting physically abused and so on. I felt I'm too close to that. That would be too much for me, I felt, because, writing a script, sometimes you have to return to it, draft after draft after draft. And I felt that could be quite triggering for me. And I had to look after my mental health. I didn't want to return to that childhood day after day after day. And so it was agreed that Alistair and Steve go away and write this thing. And I was available at every opportunity for them to consult with me if they had an issue or whatever handle they wanted to give it, and I was quite happy with that. And I actually visited the set on a few occasions, and I was hovering like a ghost over the proceedings, watching this thing being filmed. It was surreal seeing a young version of me, the fabulous Shay Cole who played me, acting out scenes that I remember from 40 odd years ago. A surreal experience.
It was, quite disturbing to watch in places, and especially the flashbacks to the children's home. But also, I don't know whether this is the way he directed it, but I felt like at the start he was showing everything that was incarcerating you. So there was, you were incarcerated in the children's home, you were incarcerated in the prison, you were incarcerated in a straitjacket, weren't you?
Yeah.
Was that at your school? I've never heard of that before. I mean, that's just...
Yeah. That was not at my first secondary school. That was at it was like a version of a PRU unit that I attended after I was expelled, where the straitjacketing experience happened with me. So not at a normal comprehensive, if you like. It was at one of these, I can't remember what they're called now, reform school or something.
Okay, and then you go to Brixton, and you get the sense in the film that was the sort of first time you sort of tasted freedom. You do get a sense of that in the film, but I wanted at this point to go to the Brixton riots happened. You were in prison for a while, and you met this amazing bloke.
Yeah.
Who introduced you to all this literature and Black history and the sort of books that you'd never, your own history. And I think he said to you, I can't remember exactly the line, but it was something like, if you don't understand your past, you can't move on.
No, your future. That's right.
So this guy was like, he was your mentor, wasn't he? He was like your,
yes, he was.
Yoda. He was the man who I think really changed in your life.
Yes, he did. He saw something in me that even I never saw, but he saw some good in me, something that I could contribute. And maybe for him, I became his project because, prison can be very boring, very humdrum, very routine kind of thing. But I think when I entered his world, he thought, here's a young person who I could work on, who I could mold, who I could shape, who I can educate. And so I felt that I'd done him good, just as much good as he did for me. And so we were quite a team. And obviously, when you're reading and discussing and debating, it makes the time go quicker. It makes a sentence go quicker. And so we helped each other. And he would introduce me to all these, at first it was Harlem Renaissance writers like James, I remember James Baldwin, he introduced me to Richard Wright, Chester Himes, writers of that ilk. And then he broadened my reading out to people like John Steinbeck that really I could relate to, the migration from the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma to the West and so on, working class kind of narratives. And I'm really engaged with those narratives. And so he broadened my mind, he broadened my scope of world experience. He really did. And I remember at one stage he even gave me the Iliad. And I thought, the Iliad? Are you serious? I don't want to read the Iliad, this Greek kind of gobbly, whatever it was. And he said, no, Alex, it's full of blood and guts. I thought, you sure? And he passed it to me and I read it. And yes, indeed, it was full of blood and guts. So it was like reading one of my old comics, if you like. So yes, it was an education.
Yeah, and do you think you would have found your way had he not been in your life? I mean, do you think?
I would have hoped so.
Yeah.
I would have hoped so because I always had it in me. Because remember, as a young kid, 6, 7 years old, I adored comics. Wherever I went, there was a comic jutting out of my back pocket, if I could find one. And so maybe I was just returning to that original love.
Yeah. So how honest a depiction was the film of your life? And how much of it was sort of creative license?
I would say 95%.
That's quite a high percentage.
Yeah, 95% because we only had 65 minutes. And so they had to kind of collapse a narrative of, say, two and a bit years into this space of 65 minutes, this narrative arc. So that was a difficult thing that Alistair and Steve had to try and achieve. Because obviously there's a gap from me and coming to Brixton. It was almost 2.5, 3 years later when the riots occurred. And so we had to crush a lot in. And obviously, because of that, there were missing reference points that maybe if it was a 90-minute feature, that would have been included. And so that's why I give it 95%, because the whole story is not on the screen.
Yeah. I mean, there isn't an awful lot about your sort of birth family, but there is a note at the end that says that you met up with your mother in America and you met your father in Jamaica after.
That's right.
And I wonder could you tell us a little bit about that? Are you happy to talk about that?
Yes, no problem.
Those meetings and how they happened and what it meant for you.
I had access to my social services files, and from there I got the full names of my parents. And what I did, I wrote letters to the Jamaican Gleaner, which is the national newspaper of Jamaica at that point, and also to a Jamaican Broadcasting Corporation.
How old were you at that time?
I was coming into my 20s.
Okay.
Then when I began the search of my parents. And it took me 3-4 years until I found my father. And he was teaching in a Kingston school in Jamaica. He was teaching woodwork and technical drawing. And we were reunited in 1987. And to be honest, I was still very much angry because he was the one who placed me into care. My mother had no idea because I was entrusted to my father, while my mother returned to the Caribbean. And so I was still angry on the plane when I met him for the first time, and I was kind of considering, do I punch him or what, But after a while, we sat on his veranda, and I think we both got kind of drunk. I was drinking Coke, Bacardi and Cokes, and he was drinking stout. And it was only after that, perhaps the next morning, where we both had sore heads, we could laugh about the previous evening, and that he began to open up, and I began to open up and kind of vent my anger, my bitterness, my rage, and he had to listen. He had to listen, for me going on for 2 hours or so, telling him what I had experienced in care and so on. But at the end of it, I felt that I was fortunate because at least I got to know him, and I would go to Jamaica every year to see him. And he would take me around Jamaica. He took me to Firefly, Noel Cowell's estate. He took me to Port Royal. He took me to 9 Mile, where Bob Marley was buried. So I'm very grateful for that. And I got to know him. I got to know other members of the Wheatle clan. So we had a good relationship in the end. He passed away in 2011. And I always say that, I'm very fortunate that I got to know him, because many people like me, sometimes we still don't know who their father or mother is. I was looking in Jamaica, but she wasn't. It took me a lot longer, and I was not reunited with her until 1998. We respond. And so she's doing well. She's approaching 90 now. And obviously, it was devastating for her to learn that I had been placed in care. Absolutely, you can imagine how devastating that can be and what I experienced in care. But we have an incredible relationship now, and I see her as much as I can. In fact, I couldn't see her this year because of COVID, but hopefully when things get better, I can get on a plane and see my mother again.
Mm. And how did they feel about sort of you airing your life and their life on a screen? I mean, did you have any reservations about that?
Well, yes. Honestly, I've got siblings who also didn't know what I had experienced. So it's difficult for them to get to know a brother that at one point they didn't know they had. And then for me to have this sudden fame, if you like, So it's not easy. It's not easy, but they've been always supportive of me, always encouraging of me, always welcome me. It's never been a problem there. You know, I love them. They love me. You know, it's I feel like I'm part of something. You know, I think what Steve tried to show in my episode was this theme of belonging and how we all need that kind of sense of belonging and who we are. We all want to fit in, don't we? And it's exactly the same with me coming to Brixton, and it's exactly the same as me being reunited with my family. You still want to belong, don't you? You still want to be part of something. Yeah. And I have that now.
It's part of your identity, and you can't deny it, can you? You can't,
exactly, yeah.
You can't ignore it. You can't be angry with it forever. I mean, you've got to sort of face up to what you are, because it is part of you.
Absolutely.
I'm going to change the tone here a bit.
Yeah.
I know that you're a big fan of reggae, and I hope I'm not giving too much away by saying that you have a unique way of relaxing after a day of writing, and I wonder if you could tell us what that is.
Dancing might come into play here.
Yeah.
I still love to dance. It really, for me, it relieves stress. Sometimes I sing even. I'm a very bad shower singer. I guess I'll take that from my days of being a DJ for a sound system. But again, we have to find ways where we can relieve the stresses that we have every day. And in the early days, that helped me as well. I mean, yes, I read comics, but sometimes too, you know, sometimes nursery rhymes, whatever popular culture hit me at that point. And I think, especially in this time of lockdown, this year, we need to find ways where we can express ourselves and just unburden ourselves, if you like. And I think any singing, any dancing can help with that process.
Yeah, I think you've always used creativity as an outlet, haven't you? Because you know, before you wrote lyrics. And
that's right, yeah.
And you've written poetry, you've written short stories. Have I missed anything off that list of creative things?
I think you probably feel,
Yeah, so
I did all those things.
Have you tried every sort of writing form?
Yes.
And would you encourage other writers to do that? Because, you know, it's
Absolutely.
very easy to sort of get stuck in a rut and think, right, I'm a fantasy writer and I don't write anything else.
Absolutely. Try other things. It's like I say to my students that if you want to be informed by writing, to go ahead and write your fantasy or whatever it may be, then taking a bit of everything. There's no harm going to the theatre and grabbing something from that art form, or no harm going to a concert and taking some of that, you know, the lyrics of a song or whatever it may be. So be informed by everything around you, everything that you enjoy. And I think once I did that, I didn't try to imitate anybody. You know, I mean, I would have been a failure if I tried to imitate a writer like Zadie Smith, for example. It's not in me to write like that. But I had to trust my own instincts, trust my own experiences, trust my own instincts, and to bring them to the page, if you like. So all those comics, all the music I've listened to, all the plays I've watched, all the literature I've read, I've used that, I've mined it to produce what I'm producing now. And I think every writer should consider that. You know, don't try to be like anybody else. Be you. Be you. That's an important thing. And that is how your work will be received, because people will see, oh, this is original, this is fresh, because it is you. It's nobody else influencing you. And so I'm very strong on that. So I think it's very important.
I did miss something off that list, because you've written plays as well, haven't you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I did a one-man show. Well, I did get to dance.
You did get to dance at the one-man show?
Yes, I did. In my one-man show, yeah.
That's brave.
Yeah, but again, you know, I enjoy that. It's I guess it's always been a bit of a performer in me, even though I didn't know it when I was young. I mean, me and my good friend Valin, who's depicted in the Alex Wheatle film, we used to go to the big sound hall and other big spaces, and from 8 to midnight we would just dance the night away, just skanking. You know, it was beautiful.
Thank you. Now I've got some questions from other people. One actually from my student Alison Goodchild, who's asking, Do you have any advice or tips on how to encourage young people to read and write, to write creatively, to help them find compassion in a confusing world? I guess writing as a comfort, I think that's the question. How do you encourage children or young people to write creatively as a way of satisfying themselves and finding comfort?
Right. Well, I would suggest discover what you're interested in. Discover what pleases you. Discover what excites you. Discover what makes you sad. Discover what you have strong feelings about or strong emotions about, and put that on the page. It might be just in a diary film. I mean, you might hate something what the Prime Minister says, or a member of the opposition, or somebody you don't agree with, or whatever. Write that down. Or then again, you might watch TV one day or listen to the radio one day, and you might love what somebody is saying. Write that down also.
Yeah.
And then you can start creating a narrative in your head. So always write what you feel passionate about, good or bad or indifferent. So that would be my first suggestion. And then narratives can come forth from that.
Yeah, I mean, Nottingham run a project called Letters of Solidarity, where they've encouraged young people to write about their experiences of lockdown. And there's some amazing responses that have come in, people writing to and from coronavirus, angry letters, creative letters from thanking NHS staff. So there's all sorts of, when you give young people free rein and say you can write about anything and you can be as angry as you like, there's always something that they can write about.
It's a very good way. Like, for example, I know a lot of young people who have trouble with accommodation, trying to find affordable accommodation and so on. And so, okay, if that's your experience, write about it. Make a little bit of drama about that. Write a 5-page essay about somebody going to, I don't know, the local council and saying, how comes I haven't got a flat yet? And having an argument with somebody on the other side of the counter. So vent our frustration, our fury, and so on, and we could turn that into compelling drama and fiction.
Yeah, and I think quite often young people don't realise that the events of their life are important, and you don't need to have lived a life of a sort of adventure to write about your life. You can write about your everyday life and make it compelling. Because we all experience highs and lows, and we all have strong feelings towards things. I know that you've worked extensively in institutions, but could you tell me what sort of institutions you've worked in, and in what capacity, how you've worked with young people? Is it with young people that you work, or have you been into prisons?
I was a youth worker for many years. I had to give that up around about 4 years ago because I was getting too busy. But even before that, when my first book was published, Brixton Rock, in 1999, I was asked to facilitate creative writing workshops in prisons up and down the country. And I found that very and assisted inmates writing letters back home to their loved ones. And that's very important, because I found that many inmates, they struggle with their reading and their writing. And you have to consider, did that contribute to them taking the path they did? And so that work is very important to me, and I've been doing it for over 20 years now. Not as much as I used to, but especially my work in young offenders institutions, where young people are basically, I can relate, because I was an angry individual when I was 17, 18, 19, felt that the world was against me, felt that there was no hope for me, felt I had no future. And so at least I can come in there and say, well, I felt the same way as you. And, I found a way. And so, we have to keep on doing that work. The work of characters like Simeon, who entered my life. And we need more Simeons out there to, facilitate this work. It's very important, especially today when there is such growing unemployment, such lack of opportunity, and so forth. We really need to engage our young and make them believe that they can contribute.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience of writing workshops, I don't know, I'm sure it's the same for you. What's amazing is that you find that with a little guidance, people can surprise themselves by
Absolutely.
what they can write. And often people think, they'll come in and say, I can't write, and I wasn't good at school, and they think that not being good at school means you can't write, that's not the case at all. Often people people might not be able to, or think they can write, but they might be exactly the people who've got something to say. So if you give them the right tools, you can help them write wonderfully and surprise themselves with what they produce powerfully. Sorry, we've got a couple more questions. What's your favourite reggae artist?
Oh, I guess Bob Marley's up there, obviously. But there's so many. Dennis Brown, I could play Dennis Brown all day and all night. What an artist he was, the crown prince of reggae. Barrington Levy, Johnny Osborne, Gregory Isaacs. There's so many. But if I was pushed to name one who had the most influence on me, is probably Bob Marley.
Okay, thank you. A question from Chelsea Black. What role do you think therapy, if any, has had in influencing your writing now?
Therapy. I wasn't particularly good at therapy because I felt that there I was, because I've had therapy, there I was seeing this stranger who was asking me very personal questions about my life. And I thought, why am I doing this? Maybe I can get a friend to do this. But I think my therapy was kind of, I wouldn't say self, but speaking with people who had experienced the same kind of experiences that I had. I found that much more beneficial than seeing a paid therapist, where we could just share our experiences, share our memories, share what had happened to us. And especially if people replicate what you're offloading just as much as you are, and they're sharing just as much as you are, and they're trusting just as much as you are. I think that's very important. And that's what helped me, because for many years, I could not speak about what happened to me in care. But once I found my particular tribe where we could feel comfortable enough to share that information, I began to come to terms and speak openly about it, about the abuses and everything else, and not feel ashamed. And that's the important thing, not feeling ashamed or embarrassed in any kind of way. So, and that's a kind of a hurdle many of us have to try and get over.
So it wasn't therapy, but other people who also that was the thing that helped you sort of unlocked things.
That's correct. Yeah, it wasn't formal therapy, but I guess it was therapy in a way, because what I gained from it was exactly the same as somebody going to see a qualified therapist.
Yeah, I mean, I would say also that writing is therapy. I mean, it helps
that as well.
Work through a lot of
process
thoughts and emotions, and almost like sort of working through a maze. You've got these problems, and you're sitting there and you're working through them. So I think writing is also therapy in itself.
Yes,
and it's cheap. So I'd advise everybody to have a go.
Yes. Because for so many years, especially in my teenage years, I had all the bitterness in here. And, it used to give me headaches. And sometimes I woke up angry. I didn't know why I was angry. But as soon as I learned to take from here and put on the page, then that anger dissipated. Is that the right? Did I pronounce that right? Dissipated? Yeah. So I was very fortunate to find that skill set, and it's very important that we find some kind of way where we can process what has happened and occurred to us and get it out of our system so we can breathe again.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We've got a Jonathan Wheatle. Is that a relative of yours?
Jonathan. Is
Wheatle.
Is that Jonathan or Jamaica?
So it just says Jonathan Wheatle is asking you a question. Do you think you will branch out into developing feature films?
Well, watch this space. In fact, I've just finished a short film. It's only about 9 minutes long, and so that will be available soon on YouTube. So look out for that. So it's definitely something I want to get into. Maybe writing scripts, or maybe producing, or even directing. And so who knows? We'll see.
Okay. Carol Williams, Alex, do you visit schools, and what do you gain from meeting young people there? And she says, I know they will gain from meeting you.
Yes,
what do you gain? What do you gain from sort of meeting young people?
Well, a writer can never work in isolation. If you want to write about young people, you have to go to young people. That's my feeling about it. I can't just work in my ivory tower and look from high up on high, and think, oh, yes, I know these people. I've got a right to write it. No, I've got to meet them. I've got to interact with them. I've got to learn to them. And so, yes, I visit schools up and down the UK as much as possible. Obviously, COVID interrupted that, but not just in the UK, on the continent as well, France, Germany, Italy, the Caribbean. Yes, I've been doing that for the last 10, 15, 20 years. So I love going into schools and seeing the reaction of kids' faces.
Jonathan Wheatle has just written, yes, cousin from Jamaica, now living in Canada.
Right, yes. We met a long time ago, didn't we?
Okay, now...
Good to hear from you.
We've got another question from Jason Forrest. A pleasure to hear your narrative and how you have applied your creative practice to writing. What advice would you give young people today who want to pursue a career within creative writing?
Just develop a habit like I did. When I was 16, 17.
That's my top advice as well.
It's so important. You might have all the gifts in the world, but develop to who you are. You've got to train for that craft. It's like David Beckham practicing free kicks. Everyone sees, the end of that, the end of his skill, him scoring goals in important games or whatever. But not many people see the practice after hours when all the players go home and he's still on that training pitch and he's scoring, he's bending that ball into the top corner. And so with me, 16, 17, I was creating. Half an hour a day, I was working on a lyric, working on a song, honing my craft, honing my skill set. It might have been given to me, but you still have to work on it. And I actually enjoyed working on it and trying it out at dances and so on, because really it's honing myself to be a storyteller. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but yes, I had developed a habit, and I still have that habit today. I feel kind of strange, and I feel like I've cheated if I haven't written anything for any given day. And so I'm always, when I'm at home, I always try to produce a bit of creative work every day.
Yeah, I'm just going to end that by saying that you can't become a writer without writing. That's the thing.
Absolutely.
We've got one more question, and then we're coming to our end. Will you tell us, this is Daria Likacheva, I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly. Will you tell us about your design work? What about your book cover? What was the process of creating it, and did you like it?
Right, that was for Cane Warriors, the UK version. That was an artist called Althea McNeish, and she was born in Trinidad. Sadly, she passed away due to COVID complications this year, so may she rest in peace. But I hope that she now has a legacy with Cane Warriors. In fact, she lived in Essex, and she was inspired by the fields that she lived by in Essex. That reminded her of the cornfields in Trinidad, and that's how she came up with this wonderful image for that. I think she created that in the 60s or 70s, I believe. And so my editor saw this, and she felt, wow, what a beautiful cover that is. So we made a deal with Althea to use that for the cover of Cane Warriors, and I absolutely love it. It's a stunning cover. It really is. Her name is Althea McNeish. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Okay,
well, thank you very much, Alex, for speaking to us, and thank you for everybody who's in the audience. it's such an interesting. You've had such an interesting life, and I wish you all the best with the rest of your sort of creative pursuits. I'm sure there will be many, and also be looking out for your books and your films and everything else that you do. So yeah, thank you very, very much, and thank you for speaking to us for the Formations programme.
Thank you for having me, Eve. Thank you.
Is there anything else you'd like to say? I don't know is there anything you'd like to say? Have I missed anything that?
Anything else I'd like to say? Be creative, listen to some good reggae music, and if you're feeling any stresses, dance the night away.
Yeah. Well, hopefully next time you might do a bit of dancing for us as well.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.